Welcome to the Functional Relations Podcast, where we set aside time to have engaging conversation. Are you drinking? Oh, is this a practice run?
Yeah, can you hear that?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah, it's a practice run.
Oh, good.
It's a practice run.
Oh, yeah? It didn't feel like a practice run.
You can hear my drinking, though?
Yeah, because the thing is, the microphone is at your mouth, and you're drinking in your mouth.
Yeah, okay.
Okay. Hi, everyone, and welcome to an episode of the Functional Relations Podcast. I'm Zachary Bird.
And I'm Caleb Davis.
All right. Caleb, this season, this is the fourth episode in season 3.
Nice. Explain once again what the deal is with this season, Zach.
All right. Season 3, we're going back and forth between episodes for supervisors and then episodes for trainees. And so because this is the fourth episode, this one is our second episode for trainees. It's not available for CEs because it's for the students.
Right. So the supervisor episodes are worth supervision CEs for those that are BCBAs. And episodes like this one, which are more tailored for the students, are not worth CEs.
That's right.
All right, got it.
And this content is basically taken from the task list. That's our idea.
All right. So what is the topic, the student topic for this episode?
It's selectionism.
It's a good one. We're really going after
favorites.
We're really going after the big terms, I guess, this season.
I mean, it's just like topics we like to talk about, right? Like our first one,
true.
determinism, which was one of our most downloaded episodes in the first 24 hours, which is pretty cool. That people were interested in. They weren't even getting CEs for it. Of course, maybe they downloaded and didn't listen. I don't know, but they don't have to tell me that. But these are topics we like to talk about. I love talking about selectionism. We talked about it together a lot of times. And then determinism, that was another one. And so basically, we're just pulling things off the task list. And then if people are interested in what can they expect from an episode like this, you can expect that we're going to give a description of this selectionism, and we're going to tell you why we think it's important. And then we're going to go through some examples that we found helpful when we were learning these concepts. So let's talk about selectionism. Where should we start?
Well, first off, I want to say that you mentioned the task list, Zach. So this is selectionism is actually part of task list item A2 for people who might be interested in where this is coming from. So it's just one of the terms that goes along with some other terms for that task list item.
Right. Yeah, it's crazy that there's those. I mean, I don't know if it's crazy. It's just like, obviously, any of these topics, you could go into huge amounts of detail. And so really, A2 has some huge topics in there for one task list item. So we'll break it down a little bit.
Should we just start with the definition of selectionism in general, and then maybe we can dive into the different types of selection, because there are multiple types of selection, as we'll talk about.
Okay, yeah, let's get a good definition for selectionism. That's a good idea. What do you got?
So the definition that I have is selectionism is a theory that all forms of life naturally and continually evolve as a result of the interaction between function and survival value of that function.
Okay. Yeah, Caleb, wow, that was a long definition. It was pretty wordy, pretty technical.
Yeah, definitely. How would you put that in, I guess, just everyday terms? Off the top of your head, do you have a non-technical everyday definition handy?
Not really, but I'll give it a shot. I think it's the theory of evolution, right? It's the theory that certain traits, whether they're behavioral or physical, get selected and they get passed on, and evolution occurs through that process. So I think it's the process of evolution.
All right, that's simple. Evolution's simple. Super easy.
Yeah, it's super easy. Yeah, people are like getting their PhDs in like evolutionary biology, and they're like, yeah, it's simple. It's simple.
Yeah.
Probably when we're in like biology class, we get the understanding of evolution and the selection like people will call it like natural selection. And what they're talking about oftentimes is physical characteristics. So, Darwin noticed that bird beaks in different locations had different, they'd be the same type of bird, but they actually had like different shaped beaks. Some would be larger, some would be small, narrower. And it really depended on their food source, like whether they getting into trees, they had to be real narrow to get the bugs, or if it was, picking up fish, it might have to be a different shape, or breaking apart seeds. And so the beaks that were the best at doing that particular task had certain shapes.
Best
and you
beaks?
can also, I'm sorry?
The best beaks.
The best beaks get passed on. And then you can also think of colors in the natural world. If you are able to camouflage the color that's closest to your surroundings, you're less likely to be seen by predators. Do you have any examples?
Yeah, I kind of think of an example of, which is very much related to survival value of like, if you're an antelope and you're out on like the plains of is it the Sahara Desert? Is that where they live?
I don't know.
Wherever
I don't know
the
my
antelope,
deserts.
Wherever the antelope are.
Where the antelope play.
Yeah.
Maybe it's part of United States.
Yep.
Where the deer and the antelope play.
Yeah, wherever the antelope and the lions are, wherever that happens.
Oh, that's yeah, okay, yeah.
Basically, you can think of it as
probably Texas.
If you're a really fast antelope, maybe you are less likely to get caught by a lion and become the lion's dinner. Yes. Whereas maybe the antelope that are not as fast are more likely to become dinner. And so over time, the faster antelope you'd expect more of them to survive and make more and more faster antelope. And so that's just like the process of natural selection from like a survival value, in the sense that like with a certain characteristic, if you're more likely to survive, you're more likely to pass on your genes to like the next generation of, in this case, antelope.
I think I'll put in one point here. One thing we should think about is that with this evolution, it requires that, and this will be all evolution really, it requires that there's some variation, right? So like if you have you're combining genes of two of the male and the female, and so you get variation through sexual recombination or mutation. So if you get a mutated gene that happens to be beneficial, then you get some variation too. And variation is required for selection to take place. Otherwise, there'd be nothing particularly to select, right? They'd all be the same.
Right. If all the antelope were the exact same speed, then they all would get eaten the same amount, and they would never get there any would be faster. No particular. Yeah.
But like, and you can think about it like your brothers and sisters or whatever. Like someone just happens to be a little faster than the other one, a little taller, a little heavier, a little skinnier, or whatever. Right? There's like just variation. That's one of the advantages of sexual reproduction is you get the combination of two genes coming together versus like single cellular organisms that are just replicating themselves, right? So better
enough for
variation.
Enough of that science, Zach.
Yeah, let's get out of the science. All right, that's a great plan. Thank you.
But
Thank
yeah,
you for
I think
pulling
that
me
was...
out from the depths of science.
That's a quick snapshot, though, of natural selection. Probably
okay, great.
Probably what many of our listeners have learned about at one point in their, I don't know. When do you go over evolution right now in school?
Right now, I don't know. I haven't been really in school right now, but
okay.
When I was in ninth grade.
Okay.
I don't know if that was the first time, probably, but that was like the time I remember it.
So maybe freshman in high school? Okay.
Maybe, yeah.
All right. Well, anyways, let's talk about how selectionism applies to behavior, because that's really what this is all about. It can
apply to behavior?
Yes.
Oh, that's intriguing. Tell me more.
I would even say that without selectionism, we probably couldn't do what we do as behavior analysts. Like what we do relies on that selectionism is a thing. And I would even say like an understanding of selectionism is like necessary to be super effective.
Interesting.
Maybe. I don't know. Maybe that's a hot take.
I tend to agree with you. I don't think it's a hot take at all. I think it basically is the foundation of our science. So yeah, for sure. So what are we using for books here? If people wanted to, get their own information when they're done with this, I'm using the Pearson Cheney Behavior Analysis and Learning textbook. That's a good resource.
Yep, that's a good one.
What else we got?
I think just some other good resources for people that want to learn more about this is B.F. Skinner's 1984 paper, Selection by Consequences.
And it's not a long paper.
Yeah, it's like 4 pages.
Okay. Yeah. If anybody's listening to this, it's 4 pages long. Just go read it. You could probably stop listening to this episode right now, read it, and then forget about the rest of the episode. Just read the paper.
Yeah. And then another textbook that I think the reason I'm listing it is just this is what I had in grad school when I was learning about this. So I'm kind of biased to it. But the textbook Learning by Charles Catania. I think that's a good text too. I'm sure certainly the Cooper book is going to have some content in there as well, but I don't know.
Yeah.
If anybody's wondering like where we're getting our stuff from, some combination of those resources.
Okay. So when we talk about behavioral selection, what's the first thing we should know?
All right. One thing right up front is we should think about there are 3 types.
3 types.
Of selection as it pertains to behavior. And so I think we'll go through each one of those individually, but just real quick to kind of list those out so everybody knows where we're going with this. First one is phylogenetic.
Okay. Phylogenetic.
The second one is ontogenic.
Ontogenic.
I say ontogenic, but is that not right?
Yeah, that's how we were taught. But even Google suggested ontogenetic. They're like, did you say ontogenic? Because I think you meant ontogenetic. And I was like, yeah, probably I did.
All right. But so the second one is either ontogenetic or ontogenic. And then the third one is cultural selection. So those are the 3, I guess you could say those are the 3 levels of selection.
Yes.
When it comes to behavior. So I think what we can do, Zach, is maybe we'll just touch on each one of those. Just discuss them briefly.
Okay.
Sound good?
Yeah. So we should start with phylogenetic.
I think that's a great place to start.
Let's give a technical definition. We'll kind of describe it in non-technical language, and we'll provide some examples.
Phylogenetic is the definition. You could think of it as like this. It's the selection of genes based upon reproductive success. So this is very much in line with natural selection.
That's right.
Right? So this is where there's the very similar to what we just talked about with all the Darwin and evolution stuff. This is where, based on sort of the reproductive history of the species, certain behavioral traits are passed on to the next generation. Yeah. So instead of us talking about the length of the beak or the length of the legs or whatever, not the physical characteristics, but maybe it's just how strong is the startle response or how behavioral. It's behavioral characteristics. Yeah.
Yeah.
Wow. So we're so in tune. We're saying the same thing at the same time.
Yeah. We're on the same page.
Yeah. So what did you just say for examples of that?
I was just saying the startle response.
Oh yeah.
Is a quick example of it's not a physical characteristics, but you might have some, let's go back to antelope, that are especially easily startled and they run away quickly versus some that are a little bit less, they're less anxious. They're just kind of hanging out and their startle response is not as, isn't activated as easily. And so they're kind of sticking around, chewing on some grass more often. So you can see how just some variability within the startle response. Some, if they don't startle enough, they get eaten. If they get startled too much, they never get to settle down and actually eat enough grass to stay alive. So just having some behavioral characteristic like a startle response, you could see how that could get selected as some good balance of being startled, but also staying and eating or drinking or whatever.
Yeah, and so for all the students listening right now, what we're really talking about is a lot of like respondent and like reflexive relations, right? Like so
Stimulus response relations, right? So
yeah,
those
like
initial ones when we're talking about Pavlov and the salivating and the just like in response to meat powder, right? You just get that unconditioned response.
eyes like dilating based on like the
Yes.
light. Like those are things that
Mm-hmm.
are just you're born with, and presumably it's because previously in like the species there was like value, survival value
Yeah.
for being able to see under certain conditions, or like if there's some dust coming in your eye, blinking like rapidly because like
Right.
then
Good
you
example.
like
Yeah.
wouldn't like have vision issues. Like all those things are are valuable. And so if people didn't do it, then maybe like there's some issues with that from like a survival perspective.
Yeah. Okay, so those are some good examples there. Phylogenetic. So that's the first level. This is just
Yeah.
biological.
One
This is
more. One more example
Oh,
though.
you have
One more
another one.
example.
Okay, okay.
Because
Sorry.
I think a lot of people can probably relate to this too, is like babies, like newborn babies engage in a
Oh,
lot of
yeah.
like these
Glad you brought this one up.
like pure pure like respondent totally phylogenetic responses, like crying, like immediately babies will often just start crying, and that's not learned behavior. That's simply like
That's a great example.
it's been selected over years and years and years and years.
Yes, generations, right? This
Yeah.
is biologically selected. As soon as they're coming out of the womb, they're crying. So no one taught them that.
Yeah.
And so these responses are that's a great example. Yeah. Okay.
And presumably too, like crying, there's like huge survival value to that, because like if you cry, your needs are going to get met. And obviously, babies
That's
over
right.
time, I think this transitions nicely into the next level. But over time,
I agree.
babies learn.
They learn?
Babies learn what crying does for them, and so they do it.
Okay, so let's
On
think about
purpose.
this. The second level of selection is ontogenetic, which is our second level selection, and it is the selection of operant behavior by the effects that it produces on the environment. And operant selection is really the conceptual and empirical foundation of behavior analysis. Like this is basically what we do.
Yeah.
We're in this level. We're doing a lot of stuff in this level of selection. So let's think about this a little bit more. Can you think of, or could you describe it in like non-technical terms, ontogenetic selection?
Yeah, of course. So for the students listening, when we think of, you mentioned, Zach, like operant behavior, operant selection.
Yes.
Really, what we're talking about is learning based on consequences, right? So
Yeah.
somebody engages in some behavior based on what happens after that behavior. Somebody is more or less likely to do that again in the future. And that really is what we're talking about. When we're talking about ontogenic selection, is if somebody engages in certain types of behavior and that is beneficial to them in their environment, they're going to do more of it. And so it's really kind of an awesome development, if you think about it from like an evolutionary perspective, because it allows somebody to be born and adapt to their environment and learn how to do new stuff and survive. Because you can imagine, like, if we couldn't do that, then we're really limited in what we're able to do. Whereas operant selection, we can learn to do all kinds of new and crazy stuff over the course of our lifetimes.
Yeah, well, that's a great point. So like now we're talking but not stimulus response relations, because that's our first level, stimulus response. Remember, respondent and reflexive. Once we get into ontogenetic, our second level, this is the stimulus response consequences, ABCs.
Exactly. And I think this level for what we do as a behavior analyst is so important, because really what we're trying to do when we're like teaching our clients or doing anything is we're trying to arrange the environment so that it's going to select the types of behavior that we're trying to teach, right? So we
Yeah.
identify, like, I don't know, examples would be like communication responses. Like, we're trying to teach communication. And so we want to arrange reinforcers will be delivered following like appropriate or like more complex communication responses, and that like maybe undesirable things are not going to contact reinforcement. And so that over time should select those types of behavior to increase, right? If we've arranged those things like effectively.
Yeah. So I'll have an example of, when I was in middle school, it was the first time I really had to use a lock, like a combination lock. And so I didn't really know how to do it. And I remember going to school, I was very embarrassed basically because there were some kids who knew how to, do that, but I didn't. And so had my neighbor or someone, come and help me, maybe the next grade up who had been doing it for a year. And they would kind of unlock, and they would do it so efficiently. It was just like they could just move it to, it's just 7:30:38 or whatever. And I would fumble around with it a lot, especially in the first couple weeks. But then what happened was my behavior got selected, the correct number of spins in the first direction. I think 2 spins in the first direction, then you have to get to the number, then backwards the other way. And my behavior got selected. And so then it became very efficient, but it was very inefficient at first. So some of those responses, many of them, met extinction. The locker never opened. And then on occasion, when I did it right, the locker did open. And so that behavior got selected. And then by the end of the year, almost all of my behavior was meeting reinforcement because of that selection process.
Yeah, that's a good example.
Thank you. Thanks. That's one that I talk about because it seems like it just like was a learning process and just had extinction. It's kind of funny because if we think about the term extinction, it's often we talk about natural selection in a species that goes extinct. The dinosaurs, they went extinct, or some different species go extinct. And it's the same thing when we're talking about behavior. We talk about certain responses meet extinction. They essentially don't exist anymore because they go away because they haven't been selected. And so that's a really good sort of analogy between this sort of natural selection and the type of selection that happens with behavior.
Yeah, that's true. I also think about when we talk about extinction and ontogenic selection, I think about it a little bit differently, I think, than maybe we typically do. Like, oftentimes when we think of extinction in practice, I think people think of it as like it's a treatment for problem behavior.
Yeah, sure.
It's what we do when we want something to go away, or like you're saying, like, go extinct.
Mm-hmm.
But I really think extinction from like a selection standpoint is really a cool process too, because when you think about it, when you place behavior on extinction, a super adaptive thing happens. And
yes.
oftentimes the organism, if we're talking about humans, the person will start trying a bunch of different things, right? So I feel like an example that I often use with grad students would be, if you go to get a soda out of a soda machine and you put your money in and you press the button of the beverage you want, and then it doesn't come out, you probably aren't just gonna like turn and walk away and like be like, oh, I guess I'm not getting my soda. You're probably
Right.
gonna start doing some different things. You're probably gonna press the button a few more times. You're maybe
That's
gonna,
right.
if you have a short fuse, maybe you're gonna start like hitting the machine a little bit. Like,
it's probably stuck in there. Gotta rock the machine and see if it'll fall down.
Yeah, maybe you like reach up in to try to like grab it. I don't know.
Right.
But
Yep.
but all these things are like, this is actually like super adaptive because it allows us to adapt to a changing environment and learn how to do new things. And what I mean by that is it allows us as practitioners to shape behavior. So if you're a student and you're in class and you're learning about shaping, basically if we place a response or a type of behavior on extinction, we can then shape like a new or better response up by waiting for something a little bit better to happen or a little bit different to happen, and then providing reinforcement for that. So I don't know. I think we shouldn't think of extinction just as a treatment for problem behavior, but like a really valuable process to teach new stuff too.
But I did want to kind of bring this back, actually. So imagine us talking about, we were talking about with natural selection, where some mama antelope has 6 babies. Some are going to be faster than others, right? There's some variability there. And what's kind of interesting is that in behavioral terms, when you think about variability, like variability can come from that extinction process, right? We were talking about like all of the variable sorts of behavior that occurred as a result of extinction when trying to get out the drink. And so I think that process is how we get a lot of the variability. Some of it's by mistake, right? If you just make a mistake, your muscles are not aligned exactly the way that they were the time before and whatever. But some of this sort of variability we get is from extinction. We weren't successful, so we do something a little bit different.
Yeah. Yep, that's true. All right. That was a pretty good snapshot.
We ended last time with crying. We ended level 1 with this crying process about how like babies, they come out of the womb just crying. So how does this relate to our level 2 ontogenetic selection or operant selection?
Right. So there's actually like some like overlap there, right? So babies initially are born with, they're engaging in crying, which is respondent behavior, which is like phylogenetic selection. But over time, babies crying contacts different consequences and becomes selected through ontogenic selection. So I think like Zach, you have a couple kids. I'm sure you can talk about how the
lots
process
of crying in my house. Yep.
lots of learned through consequences crying, right? What's an example of that?
Well, so I mean, an example is like, it probably used to be that when a baby would cry, it was because, it's a stimulus response relation. It's just that they're biologically crying when they need something, when they're hungry, need to be changed. Although I haven't seen that as much. I definitely hungry, right? Or just want mama, want to be held or rocked or whatever, these sorts of things. But this is just something that they didn't learn this. But over time, it gets selected. So when mama sets him down on the ground, now reaches up and starts crying. And now this is is that this person learned that when I cry, mama picks me up. And this got selected over time. And it started out as just kind of a natural sort of thing, biologically selected. And then it just became this thing where now anytime you want mama, you just got to cry and she'll come pick you up. Or at least on some schedule of reinforcement that maintains it for sure.
Yeah, it sort of like takes on like a communicative function.
Yeah, that's right. And we might think about this with disruptive behavior, or you can think about self-injury. Probably does the same. Started out the same way. Self-injury probably started out as some emotional sorts of respondent behavior as a response to some aversive stimulus or something, and then the hitting head or something. Over time, this can get selected because the people in the environment are responding to this because they obviously don't want that person to be hitting themselves or. So yeah, I think that a lot of times these sorts of responses will start out as respondent and then kind of pick up an operant function.
That's a good point. And I think your example of like problem behavior being selected, obviously there's like a lot of work that can be done, I think, early on in somebody's life to hopefully make it likely that those kind of things maybe don't get selected. So I think of like a lot of our sort of like early communication training, like early intervention things are kind of designed to ensure that we're trying to make sure like some more appropriate behavior is selected early on, rather than, ending up with some more problematic behavior that context reinforcement and, is added to somebody's repertoire over their life. All right. Should we move on to the third and final level of selection?
Yeah, I think I have much more to say about the first two.
Yeah, so let's just start out with the definition of this, right? So when we're talking about cultural selection, we're talking about behavior that's selected by macro level consequences for the group, involving greater efficiency, lower costs, and higher likelihood of survival for the group in general, right?
Yeah.
So this is like, it's really, rather than the individual, it's selection that occurs on like a larger group of people.
Yeah. Basically, non-technical language. It's just the selection of group behavior, and it's maintained by within group consequences. The behavior of each person supports the behavior of other members of the community. So, like, what do people do in the culture? It doesn't necessarily have to be good for them individually, but like an example could be like stealing. So stealing may be beneficial for the individual specifically, but it's not good for the whole group. And so the effects of that on individuals is like, we have lots of rules about like, it's not the right thing to do to steal. We're going to try to make examples out of other people when they steal. And so all the people in the group are essentially trying to uphold this particular cultural practice. So I have an example that was in the book that I thought was really cool. Can I share it with you, Caleb?
Yeah, please do.
We've never talked about this, so I don't know if you know about this, but the example they had was the ancient Romans adopted military tactics that were highly effective in most battles back in the day. And Roman soldiers would basically interlock their shields as a barrier against the enemy. So they were kind of like acting as one unit, right? It became, over time, with changes in technology, essentially, this sort of practice became obsolete because a lot of, there'd be a lot of casualties, or you started to lose battles more and more. And so this practice of like interlocking your shields to protect the group or whatever was like a really advanced tactic. But then over time with technology, it became obsolete. And so the practice went extinct, essentially.
Oh yeah, it's an interesting example, I guess, right?
Yeah. I thought it was just, you think about like a lot of these cultural practices, if we think of, you can think about the whole group as kind of an organism. And so if you think of the whole group as an organism, it's like certain cultural practice gets selected because it really helps out this organism, this group, to, keep going and to succeed. Versus sometimes if some cultural practice is not beneficial, it'll start to wear on the group, and they'll find that it's not effective at keeping people together, making people cooperate, and those sorts of things.
Yeah, that's a good point. And also thinking about culture too, like culture changes over time, but I think that because it's group behavior, culture also takes a while to change. Like it's not something that just overnight is going to change, because it's not like you're changing one person's behavior.
Mm-hmm.
Everybody's behavior has to change in the sense that everybody has to adopt like new practices, which can just take a long time to happen.
That's right.
So I think that's like another consideration when you think about, like if you're a behavior analyst and you're trying to change like the group, you're trying to change the behavior of like a larger group, understanding that that's probably going to take some time, and like what's actually involved in changing like cultural practices and like what affects that kind of behavior and like those kind of things.
Like fashion.
Oh yeah.
It's kind of like you can kind of see these changes in like people wearing clothes that kind of come and go, these sort of, and it's not any particular person that's like changing it. Although what I will say is, if there's a influencer,
there's like fashion icons.
Yes,
that
those people
it.
have probably a much bigger impact on the culture at large than any other sorts of what we call like normal
Well, there are
normal people.
definitely like leaders that kind of influence cultures, right? So when you think like,
good point.
You have like in politics, you have political leaders which might influence like the practices of a political party.
Mm-hmm.
In like religious culture, you have maybe religious leaders that influence like the practices of
the example
the
of
group.
military, right? That I'd given. Yep.
Yep.
And here's another one, which is just that like in a technologically advanced culture, science, which produces things like medicine, better, more efficient building, and just these sorts of things, you might see education become a cultural practice that is promoted, right? Because of the benefit for the whole society, the whole culture.
Yeah, that's a good point.
Yeah,
I find the cultural selection like really cool. I think that
it's fascinating. I wish I knew more about it. It's almost like we need to like set up a some interview with someone who's like just like knows so much about it, because I feel like I could learn so much about this topic. I just don't know that much about it.
Unfortunately, this episode does not involve an interview. Right now, I feel like we usually cut to like our interview of
should. Yeah. Oh, yeah, exactly. Sorry, everybody.
Let's go find somebody.
Let's go find somebody we could talk to about this. Are you ready? And then we put in this music. Yeah. Well, not today.
What a bummer. Yeah. All right. Well, maybe someday we'll do an episode on cultural selection.
Yeah, that'd be fun. That'd be really fun. All right. Well, Caleb, so we went through these 3 levels of selection. Can you run through them again real quickly?
Yes. So when we're talking about selectionism, we reviewed 3 types of selection as it pertains to selection of behavior. So the first type was phylogenetic selection. Second type was ontogenic selection. And the third type was cultural selection. So these make up the 3 levels of behavioral selection. And really, I would say like this kind of accounts for, if you combine all 3 levels, this kind of accounts for human behavior in general. Like this is like, whenever you see any instance of behavior, like you can tie it into at least one of those levels, but I think oftentimes they're kind of interconnected.
That's right. Absolutely. That is the thing that I did want to point out, is that it's sometimes there's an interplay between them. So we think back to this, the baby and crying. There's the combination. You can have sort of emotional responses that pick up operant behavior, but it's like, it's messy. It's not so clean as we will often try to put them into categories. I think it's messier than that. But anyway, yeah, this was a great episode. This was really fun. And I think that hopefully we found some students that were interested in the topic, that wanted to do a little bit deeper dive than maybe they were receiving, or maybe just some additional content as they were studying, just to supplement the things they already know from their classes and their studying habits. And so hopefully people found it beneficial.
Yeah, absolutely. This was fun.
Yeah. Thanks. All right. So next time you can expect with episode 5, we will have a guest on to talk about supervision, and it'll be for CEs. But for this one, no CEs, but hopefully some of our student listeners found it beneficial. And please give us some feedback. We'd love to hear it. Do you find these episodes valuable? Do you think that we should continue to do that? Are you going to help select these episodes so that you see more of them in the future? I don't know. That's up to you. Maybe they'll go extinct. I don't know.
Only time will tell. That's how selection works, I guess.
That's right. We'll just have to wait and see. All right, Caleb. Good to talk to you. We'll talk to you later.
All right, now. Bye.
Bye-bye.